At 11 o'clock precisely, when Flaxborough's registry office liked to arrange its romances as neatly as its pigeonholes, a bride in cream and a groom with hair combed to the discipline of a new broom stood before the maroon ledger and waited to be made respectable in public. The registrar, Miss Pottle, whose spectacles gave errors no quarter, smiled, lifted her pen, and opened the book at the ribbon. The families breathed as one. The groom, Cyril Dandridge, plumber by occupation and modest by temperament, pressed his hat like a confession to his chest. Rose Beckwith, whose aunt ran the flower stall by the church, fixed her gaze on the municipal fern as if it might witness for her. Miss Pottle, having a love of names properly married, began to read them out. She stopped at the second line, her face altered by a precise half-inch. "Councillor Edwin Mace," she said, and then, because disbelief in an official is a private matter, said it again. "Councillor Edwin Mace." There are moments when a town coughs. This was such a cough. It began with a titter from the seats, became a diplomatic silence, and then, as the words refused to revert to sense, settled into the particular uproar of one family discovering it has been publicly mistaken for another. Cyril, who had never been a councillor in his life and did not aspire to it except in the matter of drains, stared at the page. Rose's mother produced a sound generally made by kettles that have been left too long. Miss Pottle did not faint. She extracted from the page a neat, forward-leaning strip of typed paper that had been pasted over the printed name. The paste, in its impertinence, had not quite dried. The left edge lifted politely beneath her thumbnail. Underneath, in the registry's own hand, the rightful Cyril Dandridge reappeared, surprised to find himself gone and returned in a single morning. Miss Pottle, who distrusted miracles, snapped the book shut. The room, which had been promised to supply tears of joy, supplied them in several other categories. An aunt muttered that this would happen with civil ceremonies. The vicar's wife, present as a friend, muttered that it would not happen with church ones. Someone laughed, which improved nothing. Outside in the corridor, the registry waiting area collected itself into gossip at once. "Always said the registry was cheap paper," stated the shopkeeper, hands flat on the counter as if to hold the town steady. "Church has better glue. The Almighty tolerates human error," breathed the verger, "but the council does not." "Man's brought a spare bride and left with a different one," announced the pub regular, not unhopefully. "It's sabotage," concluded a council member, "against progress." "I've felt it for years," Inspector Purbright entered without ceremony and with Sergeant Love at his shoulder. The pair had been near the council offices on another matter, which made their arrival not providential, but habitual. Purbright inclined his head to Miss Pottle, whose indignation stood at attention like a guardsman. Love offered the bride and groom an apologetic smile, as though the police had arrived to tidy a spillage of bureaucracy. "If you please," Miss Pottle said, "someone has tampered with my book." Purbright, who treated books as one treats small, dignified animals, opened the ledger again with care. The strip of type had been neatly shaved to width and laid precisely across the line. The letters marched forward with efficient haste. Along the paste's margin, a faint green caught the light, a smear of polish with an impertinent citrus to it, not the beeswax he would have expected of the registry's oak. On the opposite page, the corner had been clipped, a tiny triangle as if a cutter had thought better of its bite. Beneath the glass top of Miss Pottle's desk, a card index showed a misfile. The Beckwith appointment card, which should have lived under B, sat as if visiting under M, with a small brass clip of the wrong size holding it down. The clip's screw bore a fresh burr, bright in the thread. "Someone's been at the pigeonholes," Love murmured, peering. "Nervous hands." "Or tidy ones in a hurry," Purbright said, his eye lingering on the polish. He glanced up at the wall clock, which was either 7 minutes fast or the town was 7 minutes slow. The appointment ticket in the out tray, Rose Beckwith and Cyril Dandridge, 11 o'clock, still glistened faintly where the stamp had pressed the time. Cyril, struggling nobly with the feeling that fate had produced a joke at his expense, said, "Sir, I came in as me. I'd be obliged to go out the same." "You shall," Purbright said, with the mildness of a promise that may take a moment to arrive. He turned a page as if it were a witness. The next leaf offered the reassuring neatness of last week's marriages. A little ash from the blotter had made a field of grey at the bottom margin. Someone had rested a thumb there, damp with something that had lifted the grey slightly. Miss Pottle's clerk, a young woman with a typewriter's posture, declared she had laid out the ledger at 10:30, as she always did. No strangers had passed her desk. No one had touched the book. She said this twice to improve its credibility. When Love asked about the counsellor's name, she flushed. It must have been cut out and pasted. The hand is... the type is so very self-satisfied. Rose, having decided that calm looked better than hysteria with daisies, said quietly, "Is Councillor Mace here?" He was not. But his name, echoing around the registry office, drew upon itself several opinions in the corridor, not all of them printable. The council member who had signed into witness explained that Mace had been at a highways subcommittee since 9, which seemed to exonerate him or condemn him, depending on one's appetite for narrative. Purbright closed the ledger, lifted the little brass clip from the card index, examined the burr again, and returned it as if replacing a clue into its case for later viewing. "Not quite the pairing one expects between a plumber and a policy," he observed, as pleasantly as a man remarking on weather that had dressed up to be noticed. Love, anxious to carry the audience's worry like a parcel for them, asked, "Sir, is the marriage invalid if the wrong name was read?" "In Flaxborough," Purbright said, "names have a habit of wandering before they sit down." He looked at Miss Pottle. "Would you mind, for form's sake, telephoning the town hall and asking if any certificates have been issued this morning under Mr. Dandridge's or Miss Beckwith's names?" Miss Pottle, to whom form was an altar, lifted the receiver. The instrument did its clicks and sighs, and the strong-room clerk, fetched by degrees, made his way to usefulness. While he hunted, the registrar's outer door opened and a woman hustled in. A florist's apron under a coat, hair pinned as if with thorns. She held up an envelope marked Registry, urgent, its red string wound more often than necessary, as if tied by someone who lived by knots. "Messenger," she said, breathless, "from town hall. They told me to run." Miss Pottle slit the string. Within lay a certificate on the registry's own paper, embossed and stamped at 9 o'clock that morning, bearing in Miss Pottle's handwriting the names of Cyril Dandridge and Rose Beckwith, already married, with witnesses declared as the mayor and the verger. The room did not cough this time. It held its breath. Cyril looked at his bride, then at the stamp, then at the clock that was 7 minutes fast. The verger, who had come to lend moral tone, made a small, helpless motion with his hands, the universal sign for, "I've not signed anything for anyone today." The mayor, not present but suddenly very much in it, acquired an invisible chorus of opinions from the corridor. Miss Pottle, who never allowed astonishment to outstay its welcome, said in a clear voice, "Inspector, I have not signed this morning." Purbright, who had watched the envelope string rather than the certificate, touched one frayed end with a forefinger. The fibers were dusted with a faint green brightness, a polish that had nothing to do with flowers. He looked from the certificate to Rose and Cyril, and then, mildly as if inquiring about garden pests, asked, "Tell me, Miss Pottle, who keeps the spare seal?" Before she could answer, the telephone on her desk, still held politely by its cradle, found the strong-room clerk and sent him up the wire. "Inspector, the duplicate ledger for marriages, Volume K, has gone from its shelf." "Sir, the door shows no damage." "The key is with me." The bride's mother made the sound reserved for gas leaks. Cyril, who could fix those, could not fix this. Love looked at Purbright and discovered his question arriving ahead of him. "If the book is missing," he said, "who married them at 9? And from the corridor someone called, with the satisfaction of a town fed on contradictions, "Councillor Mace has sent a note. He wants to know why his name is on a wedding he didn't attend." Miss Pottle reseated the bride and groom with the quiet mastery of a woman who had seen births, deaths, and passports mislaid on her counter and had outlived them all. "We shall not proceed," she announced, "until my book is itself again." Rose Beckwith nodded, pale but composed. Cyril Dandridge said that, speaking as a plumber, he preferred marriages done once and tightly. Purbright, who never hurried a room when it had its dignity to recover, asked for the registry's seal. Miss Pottle opened a small wall safe with a key from a chain at her waist. Inside sat a squat embossing press, black and officious. Beside it a shallow tin held wafers. "No one else has this key," she said. "The spare seal, kept for ceremonies in other buildings, is at the town hall. Signed out against the strong room ledger. And today?" Purbright asked. "Today," she answered. "It should be on its shelf." The florist's messenger, still catching her breath in the doorway, said the envelope had been handed to her at the town hall counter by a tall, tidy gentleman in a grey mac, who told her it was urgent for Miss Pottle and that he was saving Miss Beckwith bother. She had not looked inside. "I deliver, I do not read," but she had noticed his knots. He tied the string as if it had somewhere else to be. Sergeant Love, who wished at all times to be kind to brides, asked gently if Rose had spoken to anyone from the council that morning. "Only a clerk at the inquiries desk," she said. She had asked where to put the aunties and been told opposite the fern. Cyril confirmed he had spoken to no one at all on account of concentrating on breathing. The verger contributed that he had arrived at 20 to 11, had seen no macs of any shade, and had signed nothing anywhere, least of all at 9 o'clock. "Let us borrow your ledger's manners," Purbright said, and took his hat. Miss Pottle, with a last iron glance at the maroon book as if to forbid it further adventures, accompanied the officers across to the town hall. A trail of relatives followed at a tactful distance, breathing gossip. The corridor took on the light, feverish air of a theatre between acts. The strong room clerk, Mr. Pledge, thin, powdered with dust that seemed to have grown on him rather than settled, met them at the iron door. "The portable seal?" he repeated in horror. "Signed out at 8:43. Properly done, see." He produced the ledger, a fat book of brown lines and anxiety. Against today's date, a brisk hand had written SEALB and, in the column for initials, a swift EM. The same page also recorded Ledger K Marriages Duplicate, withdrawn at 8:46. EM again. "Councillor Mace?" Love ventured, letting the town's assumption work through him as a foil. "Could be," Pledge said, squinting. "He scribbles like that when he's in a rush." He hesitated. "But we also have Miss Marsh. Emily, typing pool. She signs EM as well. She was in and out all morning with minutes for the highway subcommittee. Very precise girl. Threads her string twice." "Where is Miss Marsh now?" Purbright asked. "In the typing room," Pledge said, and flinched as though naming her might summon her. They went by way of the post room, where the bench smelt faintly of lemon and effort. On its edge, a spool of red string had been cut down to a stubborn stump. Beside it, a small brass clip lay open. Its screw, newly bright at the slot, showed a tiny burr. Purbright touched it as a man might greet an old acquaintance he had hoped not to see so soon. Emily Marsh looked up from her Remington as they entered, lifting her wrists with the reflex of someone who thinks in margins. She was slim, neat and correct, without being intimidating. Her type slanted forward as if keen to be at the last line. On the desk stood a bottle of furniture polish, citrus and officious. A cloth lay folded beside it with the fastidiousness of a sermon. "Inspector," she said, puzzled but ready to be helpful. "Is it about the parade minutes?" I redid them without the unfortunate slogans, "Not today," Purbright said with a small smile. "We are inquiring about the portable seal and a ledger, signed out this morning by EM at 8:43 and 8:46. Were you in the strong room then?" Emily blinked. "I was, but I did not sign anything. Mr. Pledge hates my fingerprints. Councillor Mace was there ahead of me. He asked Mr. Pledge for the portable seal for a presentation, he said, and was given it. I remember because he asked me to carry the door a moment while he balanced his papers. He initialed the ledger. I would not presume describe him," Love said dutifully. "As himself," Emily answered, then softened. "Tall, well kept, a grey Mac today, I think." He was polite in a hurry. She frowned. He had a string around a folder. He tied it too often. From the corridor, a murmur arrived, multiplied and contradictory. Mace wouldn't touch a seal. Mace touches everything. It's that Marsh. Typewriters run in her blood. Pledge is asleep in there half the day. They could walk out a cow and he'd initial it. Purbright, who preferred facts to quires, asked Emily whether she had handled any envelopes that morning bound for the registry. She had. The post room checked strands of string through her fingers like rosary beads. "But I use tape for the registry when I can," she said. "They hate knots there. People pull at them in nerves." "Who polishes the post bench?" Purbright asked almost lazily. "Whoever last annoyed the postmaster," Emily said, with a small flash of humor. "Yesterday it was me." I spilt a box of clips. They went back to the strong room. Mr. Pledge, who had been watching the door as if expecting Guilt to walk in wearing a label, produced the key and opened the inner cabinet where the portable seal should rest between a ledger of fees and a box of wafers. The shelf yawned like a mouth missing a tooth. In the dust where the press had stood was the half-moon of its foot, and just beside, a thin smear of something green and shining traced by a finger not patient with wiping. Purbright turned to the sign-out book again. "The initial E. It answers readily to either Mace or Marsh," he remarked to Love, so softly that Mr. Pledge had to lean to hear. "Convenient for an alibi, inconvenient for certainty." Love, frowning, said what Flaxborough would later repeat as if it had been his all along. If Councillor Mace signed out the seal at 8:43 and the duplicate ledger at 8:46, how did Miss Pottle sign a certificate at 9 with witnesses who weren't there? "She didn't," Miss Pottle said crisply. "Someone signed me." Pledge shifted. "Her hand's easy to copy, mind," he offered miserably. "We keep examples in the files for, calligraphic constancy." "An admirable practice," Purbright said, in a tone that did not quite admire it. "May we see Councillor Mace?" Mace obliged by storming in, hat in hand, a front polished to a civic shine. "Inspector, my name is on a wedding I did not attend, and now I learn my initials have been borrowed. I was at Highways from 9. Ask any man there, though none were listening, Purbright's face did not change. And at 8:43? "In the strong room," Mace snapped, then checked himself. "That is, passing the door. Miss Marsh was loitering with minutes." "Loitering," Emily said, from the doorway she had not meant to fill. "I stood there because you asked me to fetch the first aid tin you couldn't reach, Councillor. You had the seal in your hand. Gossip is rarely silent, but it paused then, drew breath, and began again with new conviction." Love's pencil hovered. "Sir, there's your culprit." Purbright glanced once at the ledger, then at the green trace on the shelf, then at the red stump of string in the post-room as if the three formed a triangle he had already measured. "Not yet, Sergeant," he said mildly. "We have 2 EMS and a portable sanctity that walks before 9 o'clock. Before we choose a sinner, I should like to know who brought the duplicate ledger to heel at all." Pledge, floundering, said, "No one. It hasn't come back." At which Miss Pottle, whose patience had more substance than most virtues, observed in a voice that could file paper unaided, "There is a second duplicate. Inspector, a working copy made last winter when the binding split. It's kept at the registry for reference only and is not to be used for a ceremony." Purbright's gaze moved to her like a man noticing a new door in an old room. "And where?" he asked, as if the question were about weather. "Is that book now?" Miss Pottle looked to the shelf behind her mind, and then to the face of Emily Marsh. "It was on my desk yesterday afternoon." Emily flushed. "I delivered it back after the photocopying for the Chronicle notice. I tied it with a string so it wouldn't slide." "Red string?" Purbright asked. "All I could find," she said. He nodded once, as if a clock he carried had just struck. By Tuesday morning, Flaxborough had already produced 6 explanations for the registry office fiasco, none compatible with the others, all claimed with absolute certainty. The Chronicle printed a headline declaring Mace marries plumber by mistake, while the gossip in the grocer's was that Miss Marsh had absconded with the duplicate ledger and intended to publish a book of improper ceremonies. The mayor issued a pompous assurance that "our institutions remain incorruptible," which convinced no one and was repeated with relish in the King's Head until it sounded like parody. Against this chorus of contradiction, Purbright preferred the quiet corridors of observation. He strolled with Sergeant Love towards the assembly rooms, where the annual flower show was opening. "The registry office," he said mildly, "is too narrow a stage. Our playwright will want more space for his second act. The flower show will do very well, Love." Still scribbling rumours into his notebook, looked uneasy. "Sir, it's only dahlias and jam. Not much scope for mischief." "On the contrary, Sergeant. Pride is at its ripest among cucumbers." Let us watch inside. The assembly rooms were fragrant with chrysanthemums and civic duty. Tables sagged under marrows, apples, and preserves. Mrs. Malison, resplendent in a hat the size of a small parasol, presided over the floral entries. Councillor Prowse hovered near the vegetables, calipers at the ready. The mayor was to present the prizes, which had been typed neatly onto cards and laid beside the exhibits. The crowd pressed in, eager for victory or humiliation, whichever arrived first. The ceremony began well enough. A ribbon was pinned to a rhubarb, applause made a polite rustle, and the choir, brave after their ordeal, sang a short anthem about harvests. But when the mayor reached the table of potted plants, his expression stiffened. He held up the prize card for Best Rose Arrangement and read aloud, "Winner, Councillor Mace, for services to bigamy." A silence fell, followed by an explosion of laughter that rattled the vases. The next card, for Best Marrow, read, "Awarded to Cyril Dandridge, already married twice." The third declared, "Floral design, first prize, Emily Marsh, for tying the knot." Love winced. "It's him again, sir." The type leans forward, exactly the same. Purbright bent to examine one of the cards. The paper was registry stock, not a show issue. Along the edge, faint smears of lemon polish glistened under the lamps. He slipped the card into his pocket. "Our playwright likes his motifs," he murmured. "Records, registers, reputations, all typed briskly and pinned where the whole town must see the uproar gathered. Some shouted at the mayor for reading the insults aloud. Others accused Mrs. Malison of mismanaging the cards. Broxham, lurking near the antique stall, muttered loudly that he had warned them all about typewriters. Fenning insisted it was another attack on the choir, which drew heckles from the band. The audience was divided neatly into camps of outrage, amusement, and speculation. Love, taking down the contradictions, groaned. "They'll hang half the town before they find the culprit. And none of them will be the right one." "Indeed," Purbright said. "But listen, amidst the nonsense, certain themes repeat. Bigamy, duplicity, marriages mislaid. The humor is pointed, even if the crowd prefers it blunt. The mayor attempted to restore dignity, but his speech was drowned out by a child reading aloud another altered card. Consolation prize? Best. Dahlia, to the treasurer for losing the book. This final blow scattered laughter through the hall and sent the treasurer stumbling from the room, his face the color of his carnations. Purbright watched him go with quiet eyes. Fear speaks louder than denial, he remarked. Our treasurer's discomfort is worth noting. Love leaned close. You think he's involved? Perhaps not in the typing, Purbright replied softly, but certainly in the secret being typed about. When the show finally collapsed into confusion, the mayor announced the prizes would be reissued, though no one seemed to care. The gossip had its trophies already. Outside, groups clustered, rehearsing their own theories. It's Fenning again. He staples everything. No, it's Broxham. He has boxes of old certificates. Mace did it to cover himself. The treasurer, he turned pale, didn't he? Love wrote until his pencil snapped. Purbright, meanwhile, stooped to pick a fallen ribbon from the cobbles. On its pin was a small fleck of brass, burr sharp, the same as the clip at the registry. He tucked it away with the card in his pocket. As they walked back across the square, Love asked, "So where does this leave us, sir?" "Exactly where our playwright intends," Purbright said. "Amused, suspicious, distracted. But each parody narrows the theme. It is not flowers, nor hymns, nor marrows. It is marriage." Somewhere in the records of this town lies a union that ought not be known, and someone will bury the truth beneath as much laughter as Flaxborough can supply. Love shivered slightly. "And until we find it?" "Until then," Purbright said gently, "we attend the play. The second act has begun, and the third is already rehearsing behind the curtain." By Wednesday afternoon, Flaxborough had begun to tire of flowers and ribbons, but not of gossip. The flower show fiasco had circulated through the town with the vigor of a new hymn tune, every retelling adding another insult to the mayor's reading, or another sly twist to the treasurer's discomfiture. By tea-time, the treasurer's supposed bigamous grandfather had acquired 3 additional wives and a missing fortune, though no one could quite agree in which order. The Chronicle announced an emergency council meeting to address malicious interference with civic life. To most of the townsfolk, this meant another opportunity to witness calamity. Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Love arrived at the council chamber in time to see councillors jostling into their seats, whispering with the nervous excitement of schoolboys expecting mischief. The mayor sat heavily at the head table, chain glinting as if trying to shoulder dignity into place. The treasurer hunched beside him, pale and damp with anxiety. Councillor Prowse fussed with his papers, his calipers tucked absurdly into his pocket, as though he might be called upon to measure guilt. Purbright settled unobtrusively at the back, Love beside him, notebook poised. The clerk read the agenda in the usual soporific tone. But when the mayor rose to deliver his speech of condemnation, the farce began again. He unfolded a sheet of paper, cleared his throat, and read aloud. "This council resolves that in order to save on fuel, meetings shall henceforth be conducted in mime." The chamber erupted with a snort of laughter. The mayor flushed, shuffled his papers, and began again. The next page declared that the mayor's chain be restrung with sausages, which may be eaten after debate. The gallery roared. Even Prowse lost composure and barked like a seal. Love muttered, "Same type again, sir." "Someone slipped these in." "Indeed," Purbright said, eyes resting on the treasurer, who clutched his briefcase like a man guarding his last lifeline. The mayor attempted to regain dignity, but the clerk's copy of the minutes, passed hurriedly up for reference, revealed the same parody resolutions. Each sheet leaned forward in the familiar, brisk hand, margins faintly dusted with lemon polish. Some bore the stamp of the registry office, lifted neatly from Miss Pottle's desk. The councillors shouted, some with outrage, others with laughter. One proposed that they pass the sausage chain resolution anyway, to encourage economy. The uproar spread to the gallery. Citizens jeered, applauded, or shouted advice. Hang Fenning, he loves a staple. Broxham's behind it, always meddling with typewriters. It's Mace's revenge for being married off. The treasurer's sweating like a kettle. He's guilty. Love scribbled furiously, the pencil squeaking. Purbright sat motionless, his eyes never leaving the treasurer, who fumbled with a handkerchief, dabbing his brow. Each time a parody resolution was read, the treasurer flinched visibly. The mayor finally adjourned the meeting in fury, banging his gavel so hard it splintered the desk. The councillors scattered, leaving behind a snow of parody papers. Purbright stooped, collected one, and held it up to the light. "Do you notice, Sergeant," he said, "how our playwright grows bolder? He no longer contents himself with marriage registers. Now he mocks the very business of governance," Love exhaled. "And always the same themes, records, names, respectability. It's as though he wants us all to think the council's a joke." "Not to think, Sergeant," Purbright murmured. "To look the other way. The magician's flourish, while the true trick hides beneath the table." As the chamber emptied, Purbright slipped behind the treasurer, who was stuffing papers hurriedly into his briefcase. A ribbon of red string, frayed at one end, protruded from the case before being shoved in. Purbright's eyes softened. He touched Love's arm. "Observe. Fear is more revealing than parody." Later, back at the station, Purbright laid the new parody pages beside those from the registry and the flower show. The same polish smeared the corners, the same brass burr clung to one staple, the same type leaned forward impatiently. He placed the faintly frayed string alongside. Our culprit rehearses with devotion. But each act leaves a signature. One cannot polish papers without leaving a shine. Love frowned at the pile. "So what's the real trick, sir?" Purbright looked out through the window at the lamplight trembling across the square. "A missing page, Sergeant. One entry from the register that should not be seen. The rest, this theatre, is only camouflage. Our culprit has bought himself time with laughter." Love closed his notebook. "And you think you know who it is?" "Not yet," Purbright said, his tone mild. "But the guilty man is tiring. When he stumbles, we shall see the truth, and Flaxborough will have its finale." By Thursday morning, Flaxborough had tired of scattering its suspicions and began, with its usual sense of economy, to settle them upon one head. The Chronicle helped by printing a leader headed "A Man of Music and Mischief," which outlined the curious convenience of choirmaster Mr. Fenning's possession of brass staples, his regular visits to the vestry cupboards, and his reputation for pedantry. If anyone were likely to tamper with cards, registers, and public records, the article intoned, it would be a man accustomed to conducting lines. The reasoning convinced enough people for the conclusion to feel inevitable. At the King's Head, the verdict was unanimous. Fenning again. He's behind all of it. At the butcher's counter, the women nodded sagely, claiming he had always had a suspicious fondness for string. By the time the flower sellers set up their stalls, Fenning had been tried and convicted for every parody since the hymn fiasco. Even the mayor, when cornered by a reporter, muttered that discipline in music often masks disorder elsewhere. Purbright, reading these pronouncements with his mild expression intact, made no comment. But when Fenning himself arrived at the police station, pale and shaking with his brass stapler in hand, even Sergeant Love felt sorry for him. "They're making me the villain of this carnival," Fenning declared, slapping the stapler on the desk as though offering the weapon of his own destruction. "I will not be slandered. Yes, I staple music sheets. Yes, I polish the vestry desk. Yes, I correct registers when the vicar's hand trembles. But I did not turn this town into a circus. Love looked at Purbright hopefully. He's come to confess innocence, sir. Purbright regarded the little brass machine with gentle curiosity. A useful tool, he said, but an unlikely mastermind. Tell me, mister. Fenning, on the morning of the Registry wedding, were you in the building? Of course, Fenning replied bitterly. Rehearsing hymns, fending off gossip, watching children who should be angels. And did you see Councillor Mace? Purbright asked. Fenning frowned. I saw a tall figure in a grey mac pass the vestry window at 9:15. He carried something under his arm, bound in string. I thought it was another box of minutes for the council. I thought no more. Purbright inclined his head. And yet you are accused. Because I am convenient, Fenning snapped. The town needs its scapegoat, Inspector, and the Chronicle provides one. But I am not the culprit. I have my own sins, but forgery is not among them. After he left, Love muttered, He's right, sir. They've picked him because he fits the props. Staples, string, polish. But it feels too neat. Neatness, Sergeant, Purbright replied, is often the first clue of design. Our playwright has composed this scapegoat with care. While the town watches Fenning, the true hand works elsewhere. That evening, the treasurer was seen leaving the council offices after hours, his briefcase bulging. A clerk reported he had carried with him a ledger, or something ledger-shaped, tied with red string. The report reached Purbright within the hour. Love, hearing it, exclaimed, There's our man, sir. The treasurer's guilty as sin. The papers mocked him, the crowd laughed at him, and now he's sneaking off with ledgers. Purbright's voice remained calm. Perhaps. But perhaps he's only desperate to protect himself from suspicion. A frightened man carries evidence openly when he ought to hide it. It is the quiet hand we must watch. Flaxborough, however, was deaf to caution. The next day's Chronicle proclaimed, Fenning to face questions. Crowds gathered near his house, some jeering, others pitying. The choir muttered in resignation. Mrs. Malison declared that Fenning should pray for forgiveness before the court sends him to Lincoln. The town had chosen its villain and found relief in the choice. Love reported all this to Purbright, weariness in his voice. If gossip were rope, sir, he'd be hanged already. But you don't believe it. Purbright smiled faintly. Belief is dangerous, Sergeant. It is better to listen. And if you listen closely, you will hear not only accusation, but contradiction. The more the town insists on Fenning's guilt, the more certain I am he is innocent. That night, as the square emptied and gossip retreated indoors, Purbright stood at the station window, looking at the lamps reflected in the puddles. The town is convinced it has found its culprit, he said softly, but our playwright has not finished. The next act will not permit them to rest so easily. Love shivered. Another scandal, sir? Of course, Purbright replied. The play requires 3 acts. The final curtain is still to come. And when it falls, Sergeant, we must be certain of the face that bows to the applause. By Friday morning, Flaxborough had settled itself comfortably into the belief that Mr. Fenning was the culprit, and therefore life could resume its tidy patterns. The Chronicle, pleased to have its villain confirmed by popular vote, produced a cartoon of Fenning stapling him, books together with the caption, Choir Master, in a tangle. The townsfolk repeated the joke in queues, shops, and pubs until it acquired the permanence of truth. Fenning himself locked his door, refusing callers, though a milk-boy swore he heard him sobbing through the curtains. But Purbright knew the story was not finished. He sensed it in the town's uneasy silence beneath its laughter, in the way the treasurer avoided eye contact, and in the strange persistence of envelopes and notes bearing the same brisk type and faint lemon scent. The culprit, whoever he was, had not retired. He was rehearsing his next scene. It came that afternoon. The weekly market filled the square with stalls of vegetables, second-hand clothes, and gossip sold in wholesale quantities. Housewives haggled, farmers shouted, and children darted between stalls with shrieks. The mayor, still licking his wounds from the flower show, appeared only briefly, his chain hidden beneath his coat. Purbright and Love, moving quietly among the crowd, kept their eyes open for the expected disturbance. They did not have to wait long. Near the fountain, a boy delivering parcels dropped a wooden box onto the cobbles. The lid sprang open, and papers scattered like startled pigeons. At first the crowd laughed. Another accident, another parcel too loosely tied. But when the papers were gathered, they proved not to be invoices or letters, but pages from the missing duplicate marriage ledger. Each leaf bore a parody entry. Mr. So-and-so married to his own reflection. Widow Jenkins united with a turnip. Councillor Prowse joined in matrimony to the borough drainage plan. The crowd howled with laughter, children waving the pages like flags. Love snatched one, his face tightening. Same type, sir. Same staples. Same polish on the corners. He's mocking the register itself now. Purbright bent and retrieved another page, which showed not parody but truth. The ink was faded, the handwriting genuine, a marriage entry from 1899. But across the margin, in the familiar typed hand, someone had struck, "Return the other one." Purbright folded the page carefully. "The camouflage grows thinner, Sergeant. Among the nonsense lies the missing fragment. Our playwright cannot resist leaving his theme in sight." The gossip swelled like a tide. "Fenning again. He's stealing ledgers now." "No, Broxham. He sells old books. He planted it, the treasurer. He turned white as chalk. Mace. His name's on half these parodies." The treasurer himself appeared at the edge of the crowd, trying desperately to gather the scattered pages. His hands shook, his face shone with sweat, and his briefcase clattered to the cobbles as he fumbled. Citizens jeered, some cheering, others booing, as though the poor man were a juggler who had dropped his clubs. Love muttered, "That's guilt if I ever saw it." "Or fear," Purbright replied calmly. "Fear wears the same mask. But note, Sergeant, our treasurer clutches at every page, yet avoids one particular sheet. He will not touch the one that bears truth beneath the parody." The boy who had dropped the box swore a thin man in a grey mac had given it to him at the market's edge, telling him to deliver it to the fountain steps. Said it was raffle prizes for the mayor. The boy insisted, though he admitted the man had tied the box with a string knotted 3 times over. "Always the mac," Love said wearily. "Always the string." The market dissolved into chaos, papers passed from hand to hand, rumours multiplying faster than the rabbits on the butcher's stall. At length, Purbright gathered what he could, securing the genuine page among them, and guided Love away. Back at the station, he laid the pile on the desk. "Do you see, Sergeant? The themes repeat. Drains, registers, bigamy, and marriage. Our culprit rehearses them like a choir practicing a single verse, but each performance brings us closer to the note he wishes to conceal." Love rubbed his forehead. "And you think it's about one marriage, sir?" "That's all? A single line in a book? A single line may alter an inheritance, a lineage, or a reputation," Purbright said softly. "Enough for a man to risk ridicule to protect it." He touched the typed words again. "Return the other one." That is his refrain. He will keep staging comedies until his missing page is secured. The sergeant leaned back with a groan. "And until then, the town will keep blaming Fenning." Purbright allowed himself the faintest smile. "Yes, and our real culprit will continue to enjoy the applause until the final curtain obliges him to bow." Outside, the market's laughter echoed into the evening, the parody pages fluttering in windows and pockets, tokens of a play that seemed to have no ending. but in Purbright's desk drawer, the genuine entry lay folded like a script whose last act was about to begin. By Saturday morning, Flaxborough had grown tired of repeating that Fenning was guilty and had begun to embroider his imagined confession. In the grocer's queue, one woman swore she had seen him carrying ledgers under his coat. At the butcher's counter, another claimed he had been overheard muttering, "Return the other one," while buying sausages. The verger told anyone who would listen that the choir master had polished the vestry desk twice in 1 week, which was as good as an admission. By the time the bells rang for noon, Fenning had been married, divorced, and buried in rumour 6 times. But beneath this noisy chorus, quieter currents of suspicion had begun to swirl. Purbright, walking slowly across the square with Sergeant Love, listened without appearing to. The names that rose now were not only Fenning's. They were Broxham's for his shop of musty ledgers and habit of hoarding. They were Mace's for the initials too conveniently resembling Emily Marsh's, and most often they were the treasurer's. His pale face and trembling hands had become symbols of guilt too obvious to be ignored. Love, thumbing his overfull notebook, muttered, "The town's moving off Fenning, sir. They'll have the treasurer next. He'll not stand it. He looks fit to burst." Purbright inclined his head. "Yes, fear ripens quickly once planted. But it is worth asking, fear of what? Of discovery or of being chosen by the crowd as their villain?" They found the treasurer at his office, hunched over his desk, ledger open, eyes darting to the door at every sound. He jumped when Purbright spoke his name. "Inspector, I assure you, I have balanced every account. Nothing is missing, nothing is false." Purbright's gaze drifted to the ledger. Its pages were neat, almost too neat, as though rewritten in a rush. A smear of green polish lingered on the edge. He said mildly, "Your accounts are spotless, sir." Perhaps too spotless. The parodies, however, grow more pointed. They strike not at music or marrows now, but at records themselves. What record do you fear most? The treasurer's lips trembled. "It is nothing. An old story. My grandfather's marriage was irregular. That is all. If it were noticed, people would question my name, my standing. But who troubles with entries a century old?" "Those who fear them," Purbright said gently, "and those who would protect them." The treasurer buried his face in his hands. "I only wanted to keep it quiet. I never touched the registry. I never typed a line." "But they will not believe me when they left him," Love whispered. "So it is about a marriage, sir?" "Just like you said." "But if he didn't do the typing, who did?" Purbright's eyes rested on the town hall windows across the square. Someone with access to paper, polish, and stamps. Someone accustomed to tying bundles neatly and threading minutes with clips. Someone who could pass unnoticed while carrying a ledger in daylight. That afternoon, Purbright and Love visited Broxham's antique shop. The dealer looked affronted at the suggestion he might dabble in parish records. "Inspector, I sell chairs, not sins. A ledger is worth less to me than a cracked teapot. But I'll tell you this. A man in a grey mac tried to sell me one last week. Said it was old, from the parish. I refused, naturally. My trade is antiques, not arson. Describe him," Love said eagerly. "Thin, tidy, nervous," Broxham replied. "The sort who would polish string before tying it." I thought it odd. He asked no price, only muttered, "Return the other one." I told him to return it himself, and he vanished. Love scribbled furiously, then whispered, "It matches, sir." The same phrase, the same Mac. It must be the treasurer in disguise. "Perhaps," Purbright said mildly. "Or perhaps the disguise itself is the point. A grey Mac is seen everywhere because the town wishes to see it. A shadow requires little effort to grow large." That evening, as mist rolled in from the fields, Purbright stood at his office window, watching lamps flicker through the haze. Love hovered behind him, notebook still open. "Sir," he asked, "how long can this farce go on?" "The town's tearing itself apart with gossip. Everyone's guilty in someone's eyes until the final act," Purbright said softly. "The playwright has not finished. Each parody sharpens the theme. Each laugh buys him time, but he will stumble. He must, for fear cannot polish every page clean. Eventually, it leaves a smear." Love frowned. "And when he stumbles—" Purbright turned from the window, his face calm. "Then, Sergeant, Flaxborough will discover that its greatest comedy was only a mask for its smallest, most ordinary sin." Sunday dawned quiet, but the quiet of Flaxborough was never reliable. Though the bells tolled soberly for service, their notes seemed to tremble with the laughter of the past week's farce. Parishioners filed in with hymnals under their arms and theories in their pockets. Purbright and Sergeant Love stood at the back, half listening to the sermon while watching faces. They were not there for scripture. They were there for fear, guilt, and the little betrayals a glance might give away. When the service ended, the vicar approached them in the vestry, his expression uneasy. "Inspector, there is something you should see." From a drawer, he produced a folded sheet, slipped anonymously under the vestry door that morning. Typed in the same forward-leaning style, it read, "The ledger is not all. The names bind more than marriages. Look at inheritances. Return the other one." Love swore under his breath. "Again, sir." Always that refrain. Purbright's eyes lingered on the words, but his attention strayed to the drawer itself. A faint smear of green polish marked its handle, bright against the dark wood. He said nothing, only folded the page and pocketed it. Outside, the gossip was already ahead of them. "The treasurer's ruined, I tell you. His whole family tree's a weed. Broxham knew. He deals in old wills." "No, it's Mace. He's kept his seat too long. This is someone's revenge. I wouldn't put it past Miss Marsh. Those typists know all our secrets." Love, struggling to keep up, muttered, "They've turned inheritance into their chorus now, sir. It'll be the treasurer hanging from it before long." "Perhaps," Purbright said, his tone mild. "But note how the play narrows. First marriages, now property. What do both have in common, Sergeant?" Love frowned, then brightened. "Records. Written proof. Precisely. Our culprit fears paper more than people." That afternoon, Purbright paid a visit to Emily Marsh in the typing room. She looked tired but composed, her Remington resting like a soldier on leave. "I suppose," she said dryly, "this is about another page I haven't typed." "On the contrary," Purbright said pleasantly, "it is about pages typed too well. Your hand is neat, efficient. These parodies, though brisk, are not yours. But you see them, you handle them. You might even know who carries them through your post-room." Emily hesitated. "I've noticed someone, not the treasurer. He's too clumsy. This man moves quickly, ties knots that look careful but aren't. He's in and out before the clerks can blink, always with that grey Mac. But when I looked properly, I thought, no, it's only Councillor Mace." "Only," Purbright repeated. "He has the authority," she said, "and the need. If anyone had skeletons in registers, it's our councillors." Love, as ever, jumped to the town's tune. "So it is Mace, sir." Purbright's gaze remained on Emily, mild but steady. "Perhaps. Yet I wonder, if a man were guilty, would he parade himself in a grey coat at every opportunity, or would someone prefer us to believe that he does?" Emily coloured, unsure. "Then who?" "That," Purbright said softly, "is what we are rehearsing." By evening, the town was vibrating with fresh contradiction. At the King's Head, a man swore Broxham had once hidden a will in a clock case. A woman at the bakery insisted Miss Marsh had practiced Mace's signature in school. Another declared the treasurer had been seen burning papers in his grate, though her husband pointed out he had only been lighting the fire. Each rumour, like every parody, carried just enough polish to catch the light. Back at the station, Love spread the latest scraps on the desk. "We're no further, sir. Everyone's guilty by somebody's reckoning, which," Purbright said, "is precisely what our culprit intends." To drown the truth in laughter and suspicion, he picked up the note from the vestry again, his finger resting on the words inheritances, and returned the other one. But he repeats himself too often. Obsession leaks through parody, Sergeant. It cannot be disguised. Love leaned forward. "Then we watch the treasurer." Purbright shook his head gently. "No, we watch everyone else watching him. A guilty man in fear is not silent. He recruits the whole town to accuse in his place, and in their eagerness, they tell us who taught them the words." Love rubbed his forehead, as though the puzzle pressed too hard. "So what do we do, sir?" Purbright folded the note carefully, slid it into the drawer with the other fragments, and said, "We wait for the third act. No playwright ends with two. The final disruption will be our clue, and our culprit's undoing." The lamplight flickered across the square, windows glowing with supper warmth. In the pubs, laughter carried over marrows, choirs, and registries. But beneath the noise, fur coiled tighter, ready for its last performance. Monday evening found Flaxborough flocking to the assembly rooms once again, this time for the quarterly auction of municipal surplus. The sale was a peculiar ritual, beloved of the town: battered office chairs, boxes of paper clips, even the occasional ceremonial umbrella, all passed under the hammer to citizens who enjoyed the thrill of paying pennies for civic cast-offs. Tonight promised a crowd. The air buzzed with the expectation of both bargains and scandal. Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Love attended with the same unobtrusive patience as ever, though Love confessed he could not imagine how anyone might twist an auction into farce. "What can he do here, sir? Sell us the town hall?" "Perhaps," Purbright replied mildly. "But our playwright never wastes a stage." The auctioneer, Mr. Jellicoe, began with a flourish. A stack of old chairs fetched a few shillings, a clock without a pendulum went to Broxham, and a crate of hymnals produced a minor bidding war between two ladies convinced theirs would outsing the other. The room was warm, crowded, noisy with laughter and the scratching of pens on sales slips. Then came lot 42, a box of miscellaneous papers. Jellicoe tipped it on the table, and the crowd gasped. Among the curling sheets were not only dull reports, but pages instantly recognizable to half the town, parodies typed in that brisk, forward-leaning hand. Marriages by candlelight, the treasurer united in holy matrimony to borrow funds, Councillor Prowse weds his calipers. Each entry drew fresh laughter. Love groaned. "It's him again, sir." "He's planted them here." Purbright bent to examine a page. The same lemon-polished sheen clung to its corner, a faint burr glinted on a staple. But beneath the parody was something different. A genuine registry page, its ink faded but legible. It recorded a marriage in 1899, one not listed in the church's surviving ledger. Across the margin, in the typed hand, ran the now familiar command, "Return the other one." Purbright folded the page with care. And so our playwright repeats himself once more. He cannot resist rehearsing the theme. The room erupted into fresh uproar. Citizens shouted accusations across the aisles. "Fenning's done it again." "No, it's Broxham. He's buying the evidence back." "Mace planted it." "The treasurer, he won't meet anyone's eye." The treasurer, seated near the front, had indeed gone chalk white. His hand clutched his briefcase, knuckles pale while sweat beaded his forehead. When a parody was read aloud, "Treasurer marries himself for the third time," he stood abruptly and stumbled towards the door. Jeers followed him like confetti. Love whispered urgently, "That's guilt, sir, plain as day. He knows the game's up." "Or," Purbright said softly, "he fears that we will think so." Fear can be louder than confession. Meanwhile, Broxham had seized one parody sheet and held it aloft. "See here," he cried. "This is typed on registry paper. Who else has access but the council?" "You're all fools if you think it's me." His indignation only fueled further debate, the crowd dividing between those ready to hang him and those eager to clear him. Amid the chaos, Purbright's eyes lingered on a detail most missed. The string binding the box had been cut hastily, but one knot remained tied. It bore the same over-twisted pattern described by Emily Marsh, as though someone wished to show care but betrayed haste. He touched it lightly, pocketing the fragment. When the auction collapsed entirely into bickering, Purbright guided Love outside. The night air was damp, carrying the echo of laughter and fury from the hall. Love, exasperated, said, "We're no nearer, sir." Every clue points at Fenning or Mace or the treasurer, depending who you ask. It's smoke and mirrors. "Exactly," Purbright replied. "But notice, Sergeant, how the smoke thickens each time. Our culprit has grown reckless. He cannot leave the genuine page buried. He must bring it out among the parody to prove its absence. His obsession betrays him. He cries, 'Return the other one,' but each act shouts the same truth. There is one page, and he will risk anything to conceal it." Love frowned. "And you think the treasurer knows more than he says?" Purbright's eyes softened. "I think the treasurer fears discovery more than he fears guilt. The guilty hand, Sergeant, may lie elsewhere." They walked across the square, lamps flickering in the mist, the town behind them alive with rumor. In windows, parody sheets already fluttered like trophies, each telling a different joke, each feeding a different suspicion. Flaxborough had turned the auction fiasco into its latest entertainment, but beneath the laughter, something darker pulsed, the weight of a truth that could no longer remain hidden. Purbright paused, looking back at the hall. "The curtain is almost drawn, Sergeant. The final act waits, and when it comes, Flaxborough will learn that its comedy was only the mask of one man's fear." Tuesday morning found Flaxborough still buzzing from the auction fiasco. Parody sheets had been spirited away from the assembly rooms and now decorated shop windows, pub walls, and even the notice board outside the church. Each repetition added to the laughter, though the laughter had begun to sound strained, as if the town sensed the farce had travelled too far to remain harmless. In the council offices, the mayor thundered about libel, Prowse muttered darkly about sabotage, and the treasurer remained shuttered in his office, refusing callers. Inspector Purbright, however, was unhurried. He spent the morning walking the square, greeting townsfolk, listening to the churn of gossip as though it were music being tuned. When at last he returned to the station, he told Sergeant Love, "It is time for a little stage management of our own. The town has had its comedy. Now we must test who flinches when the play turns serious." That afternoon, Purbright invited the key players to the council chamber. The mayor, Prowse, Broxham, Fenning, Emily Marsh, and the treasurer. They gathered reluctantly, each suspecting a trap, each determined not to be the one caught in it. The air was heavy with expectation, and even Love, hovering with his notebook, felt the tension stir like a draught. Purbright began with his customary mildness. "We have all enjoyed, perhaps too much, the entertainments of the past week. Hymns, flower shows, council meetings, auctions, all enlivened by a mysterious hand. But beneath the laughter lies a single act of seriousness, the removal of one page from the parish register. That, and that alone, is the crime. Everything else is theatre." A murmur ran through the room. Broxham sniffed. Fenning muttered about scapegoats. Emily Marsh looked at her hands. The treasurer shifted visibly, his fingers gripping his briefcase as if it contained his breath. Purbright laid a single sheet on the table. It was the genuine entry from 1899, rescued from the heap at the auction. Across its margin, faint but undeniable, was the typed refrain, "Return the other one." He let the words rest there in silence before speaking again. "This page proves two things," he said gently. "First, that someone has access to the registers and the means to parody them. Second, that this someone is obsessed. Obsessed enough to risk ridicule, to plant parody after parody, all to hide or recover another page." He looked round the table, his gaze resting on each in turn, finally settling on the treasurer. "The missing page records a marriage irregular enough to trouble a man, whose name depends on respectability. Bigamy, in fact. That fear explains much, but fear alone does not type parodies, bind boxes, or smear polish across every page. Fear finds accomplices, willing or otherwise." The treasurer's face glistened. He opened his mouth, closed it again. The room's eyes fixed on him, waiting for either denial or confession. Purbright continued quietly. "I shall read the entry aloud, unless someone here prefers to speak first." He touched the page lightly, though he had no intention of reading it yet. The test lay not in the words, but in the waiting. The silence thickened. Broxham cleared his throat. Fenning muttered something about persecution. Emily Marsh shifted in her chair. The mayor scowled, but it was the treasurer who broke. His hand jerked towards the paper as though to snatch it away, and then, realizing what he had done, he sank back into his seat, pale as stone. Love whispered urgently, "There, sir." "That's it." Purbright nodded once, then addressed the room. "You see? Fear betrays itself before speech does. A guilty conscience cannot bear the possibility of exposure. Our treasurer has shown us more in one movement than a week of gossip ever could." The treasurer at last found his voice, cracked and desperate. "I never meant it to go so far. I only wanted to protect my family's name. The parodies, the papers. Someone else did those. But I could not let that page be seen." Purbright inclined his head. "Perhaps you did not type the jokes yourself. But your fear provided the motive, and fear, once loosed upon a town like Flaxborough, finds eager actors. We have watched your play, sir. It is time to lower the curtain." The mayor harumphed with satisfaction. Prowse muttered about disgrace. Broxham looked relieved. Fenning sat up straighter, his vindication almost comical. Emily Marsh gave a small sigh, and Sergeant Love, pen scratching furiously, could not hide his admiration for Purbright's quiet trap. When at last the gathering broke, the treasurer sat slumped, his briefcase unopened beside him. Purbright rose without triumph, only calm inevitability. As they left the chamber, Love whispered, "So that's it, sir? We've got him." "Not quite," Purbright said softly. "We have his fear. Tomorrow we shall have the rest. Then the town will learn how much of its laughter was merely camouflage for one man's desperation." By Wednesday morning, Flaxborough's appetite for gossip had reached a peak, but the laughter sounded brittle now, as if everyone knew the play was nearly done. The parody sheets had lost their shock and become ornaments in windows and pub walls. The townsfolk were impatient for an ending. It was whispered the inspector would say his piece before the council that day, and no one wanted to miss it. Purbright allowed the expectation to grow. He spent the morning at his desk, the stack of parody pages spread before him. Each bore its mark. The brisk type, the faint sheen of polish, the occasional burr of a staple. He set them in order like a conductor arranging his score. Love hovered anxiously, eager for the curtain to fall. The council chamber was crowded when they arrived. Councillors shifted in their seats. Townsfolk filled the gallery. The mayor tried to look dignified. Prowse fidgeted with his calipers. Broxham folded his arms in defensive triumph. Fenning, pale and weary of suspicion, sat rigidly upright, as though posture itself were a defense. Emily Marsh watched quietly, her hands folded in her lap. And at the center, hunched over his briefcase, sat the treasurer, hollow-eyed, trembling. Purbright rose with his habitual mildness. Ladies and gentlemen, we have all enjoyed or endured a week of entertainment. Hymns altered, flowers mocked, resolutions parodied, even an auction turned to farce. Each bore the same signature: brisk typewriting, polish where none was needed, and knots tied too carefully. These were not pranks, they were rehearsals. The purpose of each was to distract us from one simple theft, the removal of a single page from the parish register. A stir ran through the chamber. Purbright lifted a page from his folder, the genuine 1899 entry, folded and carefully preserved. This is the page our culprit tried so hard to conceal. It records that the treasurer's grandfather, already married, took a second wife. In other words, bigamy. That discovery would tarnish a family name built upon respectability. And so, to hide it, a page was stolen. The treasurer closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging. But, Purbright went on gently, a stolen page leaves a gap. To disguise it, our culprit filled the town with parodies, typed jokes, mocking resolutions, farcical entries. Each new scene bought him time. Each laugh kept us from noticing what was missing. Fear wrote the play, and fear directed its actors. He turned his gaze on the treasurer. You, sir, feared exposure most. You clutched your briefcase as if it held your life. You recoiled at every parody that touched your name. You trembled at the thought of this page being read aloud. But fear does not type, nor polish, nor tie knots. Those tasks were done by someone else, someone who carried your fear for you. The room shifted uneasily. All eyes turned to Emily Marsh. Purbright's voice remained calm. Miss Marsh, you handled the envelopes, the string, the polish. You had the typewriter whose hand matched every parody. You signed initials that could be mistaken for maces. You saw an opportunity to serve the treasurer's need while enjoying a private amusement at the town's expense. And so you rehearsed your jokes in public, confident the blame would fall on Fenning, on Broxham, on Mace. You played director to Flaxborough's comedy. Emily's face flushed. She opened her mouth, then shut it again, her composure trembling at last. I only meant to ease the strain, she murmured. The treasurer begged me. He was desperate. I thought if people laughed, they wouldn't look too closely. And it was so easy. One ribbon here, one page there. No one ever notices the clerk. The treasurer groaned, burying his face in his hands. I didn't ask her to go so far. I only wanted the page gone. Purbright inclined his head. Fear begins small, treasurer. It is others who give it form, but responsibility cannot be passed like a parcel. You feared, and she acted. Both share the burden. The mayor, pompous with relief, declared that order would be restored. Prowse muttered about scandal. Broxham looked vindicated. Fenning sat straighter, the weight of suspicion sliding off at last. As the meeting dissolved, Purbright gathered his papers quietly. Love whispered, So it was both of them, sir. The treasurer's fear, Miss Marsh's hand. I'd never have guessed Purbright gave the faintest smile. Most crimes are like that, Sergeant. Fear provides the music, and someone else plays the tune. But the song always ends the same. Outside, the town absorbed the revelation with its usual appetite. Gossip shifted swiftly. From Fenning's supposed guilt to Emily Marsh's cleverness, from the treasurer's disgrace to the mayor's dignity. The parody pages, once trophies, now looked like evidence. By evening, they were being taken down from windows, though copies lingered in drawers and memories. Purbright and Love walked across the square as dusk settled. Do you think they'll remember the truth, sir? Love asked. They'll remember the comedy, Purbright replied softly. The truth will become another anecdote, polished by retelling. But Flaxborough will have learned something, even if only for a week, Love sighed. Until the next scandal. Exactly, Purbright said with his mild smile. The stage of Flaxborough is never empty for long. They passed into the mist, their footsteps steady, while behind them the town settled into its routines once more. Its ledgers, its hymns, its flower shows, changed only slightly, as though the laughter still echoed faintly under the cobbles.